The Articles of Confederation versus the Constitution. The Articles of Confederation was the first U.S. Constitution. At its heart, its main goal was to limit the power of the central government, instead allowing the states to largely maintain their sovereignty. This push for a weak federal government came as a direct result of the years of highly centralized monarchical rule the colonies had endured under Britain. Some of the effects of this central objective was the federal government's lack of an executive branch or figurehead, the lack of a Supreme Court to settle disputes, and the need for a supermajority to pass bills, which resulted in slow legislation, as well as the fact that the central government could not levy taxes, only request them from the states, making it very difficult for the federal government to raise funds. One major success of the Articles was the Northwest Ordinance, which created a process by which the territories could apply for statehood as well as abolish slavery in the Northwest Territory. On the other side, one of the major failures of the Articles was Shays' Rebellion. In Massachusetts, an angry mob of indebted farmers led by Daniel Shays rose up in violent rebellion against the government. Although the rebellion was eventually put down by the Massachusetts militia, it highlighted the fact that relying on state militias as a result of the lack of a national army could prove ineffective eventually.
There were lots of main goals and effects that were caused by the Constitution. A main goal of the Constitution was to create a stronger federal government, which was supported by the Federalists, which ultimately led to a back and forth between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, since the Anti-Federalists did not support the Constitution. Another was to ensure that events such as the Shays' Rebellion were not repeated. The Shays' Rebellion ultimately led to the creation of the Constitution, since it was one of the major influences in the calling of the Constitutional Convention, which took place in Philadelphia. In this convention, the Constitution was created. An effect of the Constitution was a successful Constitution that is still used to this day. It created the separation of power, the Bill of Rights, bicameral legislature, and executive branch. Another effect of the Constitution was the Whiskey Rebellion, as it was the first test of federal authority in the U.S. This rebellion enforced the idea that the new government had the right to levy a particular tax that would impact citizens in all states.
Major differences and reasons for changes. There was an evident need for a stronger central government that led to the Constitutional Convention in 1787. The Constitutional Convention was in Philadelphia, where the Founding Fathers came together to draft what would become the Constitution. The main reasons for the need to create a constitution was because the Articles granted little power to the central government, and there was not a separation of powers like there is today, like the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. So then off to the left, there's a chart of the main topics and differences between the Articles and the Constitution. So the topics are levying taxes, federal courts, regulation of trade, executive, amending document, and representation of states. And then basically just shows the differences between the Articles and the Constitution and basically how it changed. Okay, and then next we have codification of law to bicameral Congress. So off to the left we have Articles of Confederation, and it was just basically a single chamber of parliament was in control of passing all of the laws. And so under the Articles, the individual states could basically pass any laws they wanted to, which was different from the Constitution because the Constitution broke the duty of laws down into two chambers that could both turn down a law if they saw it unconstitutional. So this was different because the Constitution gave the central government more power and split up the government, leading it to be not as simple to pass any given law than it was in the Articles.
Now we're going to be looking at the voting power and how it changed between the Articles and the Constitution. In the Articles, each state was given a single vote, independent of their size or population, and this to ensure equal representation between the states, and that no one state would mute or cancel out the opinion of another state. They changed this in the Constitution because the population densities began to change, and the North began to have a higher density, and the South was more spread out and had a lower density. And the Constitution gave every state a representative that would vote for the people, and the power of that vote would depend on the population of the state. This came with the Great Compromise, which gave each state an equal number of representatives in the Senate, and the amount of representatives in the House that they had was proportional to their population. This also led to the 3/5 Compromise, which ensured enslaved people enough voting power as 3/5 of a white person or a non-enslaved person, in the sense that in the census, in order to give the South more voting power. Now we're going to look at the distribution of government power between the Articles and the Constitution. In the Articles, the power was distributed among several unions, and instead of branches or houses, the unions had a single assembly where they made most of their decisions. The members of the union was also selected by state governments rather than the people's vote, which led to corruption. In the Constitution, they created 3 branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial branch, and each branch had checks and balances on each other's power that made the process of passing and creating laws balanced.
Another difference between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution was that in the Articles of Confederation, the Bill of Rights wasn't included. In the Constitution, the Bill of Rights could be used by anyone because the Constitution believed everybody to be equal. It was added due to the requests of the Anti-Federalists. Another difference between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution was that in the Articles of Confederation, for a law to be enforced everywhere, 9 out of the 13 states would have to agree upon it. And in the Constitution, the House of Representatives and the Senate must agree for a law to be passed. Later, individual states were allowed to nullify some federal laws. The Supremacy Clause was where federal laws have authority over state laws, and the Constitution has simple majority necessary to pass most forms of legislation.